Hello, and welcome to the Catholic Art Institute podcast. I'm your host, Kathleen Carr, and today I'm joined by Anthony Visco. Those of you that have followed our organization and were at our first conference probably know Anthony already, but I'd like to introduce him because he has an impressive list of awards and background. So Anthony is an award-winning, renowned sacred artist. He studied at the Philadelphia College of Art, Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture, and the Accademia delle Belle Arti in Florence. He has received numerous awards, including the Elizabeth T. Greenshields Award, the Fulbright Hayes Grant, the National Sculpture Society Henry Hearing Memorial Medal, and two Arthur Ross Awards from the Institute of Classical Architecture and Art for sculpture in a liturgical setting. He's been commissioned numerous times, and his work can be seen nationwide, including several pieces at St. Rita's in Philadelphia and the Stations of the Cross at Old St. Joseph's National Shrine in Philadelphia, as well as murals and sculptures in the Shrine of Our Lady of Guadalupe in La Crosse, Wisconsin. He's also an educator and has taught at the Philadelphia College of Art, the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, the New York Academy of Fine Art Graduate School, the Sacred Art School in Florence, and he has his own atelier for the Sacred Arts in Philadelphia. Thanks for joining me today. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Kathleen. It's always a pleasure.
Well, I'd like to begin, if you could share a bit about your journey into sacred art.
Sure. It began as a child. I loved to draw, and my only exposure to art was really the church, the statues that I'd see in St. Bartholomew's as a child back in the 50s. There was these wonderful white Carrara pieces that had been commissioned for this new church. So I think it was dedicated in something like 1956. So you can get the idea. It was done in a great Georgian style, and this incredible life-size crucifix with two gold-leafed angels on either side, again done in white marble. And I can remember just being awestruck when the first time I got into the sanctuary as an altar boy and I saw this incredible life-size corpus and how moved I was by it. And so my education was really simply that, just looking at things and trying to draw from imagination. And that continued up until I went to college at the Philadelphia College of Art. And needless to say, like most people who were figurative, had nothing to do with being secular or sacred, most of us were talked out of it by our first semester. And they do what I call the first lesson of conversion, which is if your talent, even back then, was called native skills, and that we should never, a real artist never relies on his or her native skills. And then when they saw the kind of work I was doing, they not only was I relying on native skills, which you can't do as an artist, but also I was doing an art form that no longer existed. I missed that period. I was born in the wrong time, or this arm was attached to the wrong body. So, when you're an 18-year-old kid and it's the 60s and you're hearing all this stuff, you actually believe it, And so by my second year, I was completely non-representational and continued to do so. And, got the scholarship to Skowhegan School based on that non-representational work, and also the Fulbright on the same. What changed it was during that summer in Skowhegan, there was a little cabin on the way up to the painting sheds. And then there was an old stereo and old records. And I'd go there alone in the afternoons, and I found all these 78s. And there was a pile of them labeled Bach's Mass in B minor. And I would start to listen to them, and in particular the Benedictus, and all of it came back. And I started to think about how sacred art is put together, especially with music. And then, of course, in the visual arts, and how there's composition and content are joined in these things. That pretty much ended it for me. And I went back to school. My last year, my teachers were very disillusioned in the sense that they saw that I was going back to um, uh, drawing figures from my head and doing these compositions, things like that. Nevertheless, I still was awarded the Fulbright, even though I'd changed my mind. And when I got to Florence, that was really the big life changer, in that I saw all these great, incredible masterpieces that I had only learned in a very, very linear way in art history. How, one begets another until we had the same formless language, so you can discuss Giotto's betrayal of Christ, and Pollock with the same exact language. Something's really wrong with this. And then it was that very linear, this begat that and that begat that. But when I saw all the great works in Florence still being used, not so much today, sadly, they've been forced into museums. But the fact that you can go up to that great Masaccio fresco of the Trinity, and what the art history books washed out was the rack of candles in front of it, the woman kneeling at the prie-dieu, the flowers, all those things. And I thought, these things are still alive. They're still alive and still active. And that to me was just, like I said, a life changer. So the only problem was, this is now 1970, 71, and our newer churches were simply not using anything like what I was doing at the time. But I had made up my mind then that whether the church wanted it or not, I wanted to do it. And that started it. That's really what started me back into it, let's say. And continued ever since.
What did you learn in particular about being in Italy? I'm sure that was just, as you were saying, very inspiring. And there's just something about being able to study the work in situ that I'm sure that, it sounds like that was just a very enriching experience for you.
It was, and studying it in situ, and mostly alone. I have to say, my study at the Accademia delle Belle Arti was very, very short. Again, for almost the same reasons. Italy at that time was, and still is, trying to catch up to the American art schools, and they're becoming more and more conceptual. So when the maestro heard that I was from Philadelphia, he said, "Why are you doing this? You should be working in neon and plexiglass. That's where America is." I said, "I came here to get away from that exact thing, So I decided to just go to museums and churches and work on my own. There were no ateliers. There was no, and any of these academies or ateliers that are there now were just completely non-existent. But if I tell you now that I could go into the Medici tombs and draw from Michelangelo alone, completely alone, that's just impossible to do today. But it was, tourism hadn't just blown out of control the way it is now. But yeah, I would go in and just sit there for hours, or go to Masaccio and draw in front of those frescoes as well. I tried that last year. I was chastised terribly. It's so guarded now. I put a perfectly clean kneaded eraser on the marble rail there, and the guard came over and just said, "No, no, no, I'll throw you out." And then there was a changing of the guard, and the second guard was told, "Be careful of him. He's got an eraser." And amazing, just amazing what's happened, And again, it's this turning our sacred art into museum pieces. And of course, they should be protected. I understand that. But they're not being used as well or as often as they could be or should be. So, but yet, nevertheless, to answer your question, I learned a great deal from just looking at it both inside and outside every single day for a whole year.
Yeah, I had the fortune of being able to study in Florence too, so I know it's life changing to be
Yeah.
immersed. And the city is so beautiful, and everywhere you go, you turn the corner and there's a Luca della Robbia sculpture. It's amazing, and there's just nothing like it. And it is so inspiring. And I found myself kind of having the same experience where you get into art college, and the professors are sort of getting you on that off ramp into abstraction and other things. And there's a real power to that because you're young and you get in there, and
Sure.
I wanted to learn to draw like Michelangelo, and it was like, well, when is that going to happen? You'd have to just do it yourself, but you were always sort of discouraged. Like, okay, well, that's done. Now is the endless quest of novelty, and that's experience too. So
Well, yes, the uniqueness and novelty aspect, and we modernism reversed that whole thing where it was beauty is always novel. I mean, St. Augustine tells us that ever new.
right.
But we changed it to novelty is beauty, and that's just not the way it works. So we've done a whole reversal of that. We've turned it upside down.
Yeah. What is your opinion on the state of the arts and architecture in the church today? Do
we're,
you think?
we're at a cusp. We're at a division point again between. I'm calling it the end of the tail end of the chaotic modality and going back toward the bilateral. Um, Mainly because when we see what's happened in a lot of these very very modernist churches where they're designed like a pinwheel or something, and it problem for me is it alters liturgy. This
Yeah.
idea of placing the altar dead center, everybody has a full view of it, yes and no. It requires, and of course you understand this because of our both of us our love for the liturgy at St. John Cantius. It just alters the reception of communion. And a lot of, for centuries, our church designs changed according to liturgy, to accommodate liturgy. For example, yes, we have Santo Stefano Rotondo in Rome, 3rd century. It's a circular church. But when we look at the liturgy of that period, well, if you received communion once a year, you were lucky. All right.
Right.
So you just went to the mass and you stayed, and there's no pews, there's nothing. You just stayed there until the sacred rites were completed. As the liturgy changed, and in particular the reception of the Blessed Sacrament changed, our churches went accordingly until we finally came to this wonderful. Well, we had cruciform churches before that, but now at the central nave where we went up and we did, we went on both sides. This wonderful bilateral building shaped like our Lord on the cross. It just the harmony of that. It really is the seamless garment in that sense. So I'm seeing that one side is still continuing with this folly of the circular church. I always find it interesting that they're willing to go back to the 3rd century. And they say, well, that was the church of the 3rd century. But they won't go back to the 13th. What's the problem? You'll go all the way back. Don't go anywhere. It's always an imbalance and always about uniqueness. And again, that harkens back to things that we learned in art school years ago that we had to fight to go. I don't want to be that unique.
Right.
I want to make things in harmony with their surroundings. So I think that affects the art that we put into those places because in a lot of the more modernist churches, devotional art just simply doesn't fit.
That's right.
They don't do devotions. I've done one of them so far, and again, it's what Dr. Dennis said in that other interview that you did with him about intentionally hiring someone who is not Catholic, who is not familiar with the liturgy, and saying, why don't you design a church for us? And that again harkens back to art school where they'd say silly things like, wouldn't it be great to get a potter to teach dance? No. So, This one particular university chapel that I worked on, I didn't work on the chapel I worked on. They asked me if I would do the stations, and the architect was not Christian at all, but he liked the idea that he could get an artist to do all the artwork for it. And so at our first meeting, he handed me a postcard of a Barnett Newman painting. He said, "Well, this is one of the stations. This is what I'm thinking of." I said, "Well, then I'm the wrong guy. I don't do that. I would never, and I wouldn't do that."
No.
I finally got to do 15 reliefs. All right. And in the beginning, they were on the different columns or pilasters in the church. They since have been taken down and put in some sort of area where they're all scattered on one wall. That idea where you don't process around. So, but I remember being at a meeting and the architect saying, "Well, I want you to do these so that if you're, say, in front of number 8, you could say that's number 4 if I want it to be, and you could be in front of 2, but you say no, I want that to be 12." And here's a Jesuit priest sitting on this committee, and I looked at the architect and I said, "Did anyone tell you that the stations are sequential?" And I mean, Kathleen was just dead silence. Here, this man's been working on the building for over a year now. And I'm sorry, but we're still kind of there a little bit. We're still
Yeah.
there. We gotta get out of it. I'm not saying you're going to be guaranteed a great work of architecture if you hire a Catholic architect. Although we do have great Catholic architects now,
Right.
but we can't really continue playing that. Wouldn't it be great if a Potter taught dance syndrome in terms of the liturgy?
Yeah. Well, there are some reasons for hope, though.
Oh
With some
yes, absolutely,
the construction, Duncan Stroike's work and James McCreary,
absolutely.
some of
Yeah.
these, which is, thank God, because yeah, more of the '70s, I couldn't take it.
Well, no, I just worked, a couple years ago now on St. Joseph's in Downingtown, PA. And again, it went back to the cruciform tradition. Okay, the altar is a little modernist, and the work is original but not new. The problem is that, unfortunately and sadly, we've had so many closures in the Archdiocese that we are recycling some of these great works that we had in other churches that have been closed. So all the sculptures of the various saints are all beautiful marble works that have been removed and replaced now in the new church. Stained glass window, gorgeous Bavarian stained glass window from Most Blessed Sacrament Church that had been closed. So Monsignor got those for the new construction. So we're not losing it. Let's put it that way.
Well, that's good.
Getting used. Yeah, it means no commissions for new, but fine. It's still, we don't want to get rid of that work either, just to make room for something new.
That's right. And thanks be to God, it's not just more things ordered out of a catalog.
Oh, no.
That's always a problem.
Whether it was La Crosse or Our Lady of Guadalupe in Buckingham, PA, or St. Joseph's in Downingtown, PA, none of them had catalog work in them. I know Cardinal Burke is completely for reintroducing the irony is it's the traditional churches that are following Vatican II document, which was to employ contemporary artists, which meant living.
Yeah.
Remember, this is in Latin, so it didn't mean modernist. And yet the modernist guys are the ones that are really doing the most ordering from catalogs or commissioning, someone who doesn't. I've had former students that get these commissions, and I say, "How did you get them?" I mean, they're okay, but again, they don't even know who the saint is, and they just I don't know where the priests even found their names. But anyway, there's work being done. There's work being done.
Yeah.
I saw the other day at the Foundry a life-size bronze of Saint Ignatius, and I said, "Is this Ignatius, or who is this?" And the guy at the foundry said, I don't know, the artist just wrote down Iggy. And I looked at the face. The face was very nicely done. I thought, this looks like the profile of Ignatius. But the cincture wasn't Jesuit at all. You know, I mean, that's a very distinct habit. And it was just more like a tunic with an elastic waistband. It was very strange, but, you know, and again, I don't blame the artist. Maybe they're not getting the guidance.
Yeah,
So
probably. I know it's when I've had to do things, I just have to do my own research sometimes, and
absolutely,
and,
absolutely.
and come to the
But
priest.
I'm always glad to hear that works are being commissioned. You know, that's always good to know and hear. That again, we're continuing with commissioning contemporary works. I don't want to say mod, but contemporary works.
Yeah, working in this, just as Duncan Stroiker or McCreary are doing traditional architecture, it's not copying anything. It's
No,
I thought Duncan put it well that he's trying to make sort of grandchildren. That you're borrowing from the language and you're creating something anew, but it's proportionate and beautiful, and that's
they're in the family. They are in the family.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I education is very important. I think I certainly understand this, and so do you. And I know a good like classical drawing and painting. Some of the ateliers are doing good training, which is important. But I think that there's something more that needs to happen when you're approaching sacred art. That it's not simply just taking a 19th century technique. So, what are your thoughts? Could you discuss your
Sure,
thoughts on
sure.
that?
I've been writing about this a lot as well. Because a lot of times people say, well, where do you get your sense of composition? And where does this come from? And I realized that the ateliers, and again, they're trying to make up for a lot of times people that were going to the ateliers, Kathleen, as you well know, went to art school and were very, very disappointed. And they come out and they say, I want to learn how to do something. And they go to the ateliers, or they'll, even in Europe or whatever, and whether it's the Russian one or the Chinese one or the American one or even the Italian one, they're pretty much all teaching the same thing, and it is 19th century French atelier techniques. And the students wind up maybe being able to paint one good single figure on a plain background, or one good head on a plain background, but never, ever two figures together, or even more than that. And what I realized, and what I've been doing, I did it at, as you know, at St. John Cantius and twice in Florence. Within 5 days, I can get people working on multi-figure compositions from their head, which is, when we look at the history of all these great figure compositions in Catholic art history, we see that whether it's Veronese or Goya or any of them, even Poussin, they're working strictly from memory. So we've lost that ability. I think the ability's there. We've lost the teaching of form memory, which was something really important in those earlier schools. I mean, if we go back to drawing history, and again, our beloved Florence, when we think that there's no big tablets of paper and all this stuff. A piece of paper was rare. You really had to be good to get a piece of parchment or something drawn. But in the studios of Verrocchio and um, Ghirlandaio, students had a piece of boxwood, very smooth, polished boxwood, and they would paint a layer of casein on it and let it dry overnight. And the next day, whether there was a model or a statue or something else, or drapery in front of them, they'd take out their silver point or metal point, probably lead, and they would draw on it. And the maestro would come around and correct their drawing and show them how to hatch and show them how to make something linear. At the end of the day, the casing with the drawing on it was scraped off, repainted with a layer of casing for the next day, and on and on and on. So in essence, they're learning not by reproduction, but by repetition. And so when you, I was just talking to a musician friend of mine this morning about solfege or solfeggio and the training of musicians in solfege and that lacking in the visual arts so that you can call to mind a note and you know how to sing it or play it. We do have that in the visual arts. It's just simply not being dealt or taught any longer. But yeah, it's very easy. Well, I'm saying I think it's easy to train form memory so that the young artists can compose and do multi-figure compositions from their head. And that's what we've got to get back to, not copying a barred drawing or a cast drawing. All those things are good. That's fine. But that's not getting us closer to things like what some other artists are doing these incredible compositions. You know, most people, if you said to a young artist, I want you to compose an assumption drawing, they wouldn't know how to do it. And that's, I mean, our teachers aren't saying things or telling students today, oh, by the way, that painting of the Coronation of the Virgin, Fra Angelico did not have 200 models in the room. You know, it's all from imagination. It's all invented. So we've got to get back. Of course, life drawing is indispensable. And I was explaining this to a student last week that when you draw from memory and you get stuck, you say, you know, I don't remember how that works on the figure. And the next time you have a model in front of you, you will be hungry for that. And you'll go right for it and say, that's what happens when you move that way. And you take that back into your sort of form memory bank. And one thing builds on another.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We're going to have to work on a little workshop or something where you can teach these, hopefully we can discuss, because I think it's a really important and interesting approach that I don't know anyone is really teaching that these days. So.
No, I've researched. I found one video of someone who's probably about the same age as me teaching figure composition, but the guy can draw from memory. And he doesn't say, oh, yeah, by the way, I'm doing all this from memory. He just says, well, you have an idea and you draw it out and then you color it in and this and that. You forgot that missing ingredient. You know how to draw from memory. Yeah. And you got to train people how to draw from it. You got to teach them form memory. And it's very teachable. It's very teachable.
So what advice would you have for a young artist seeking to devote their career to sacred or devotional art?
I would tell them, first of all, to visit churches, as many as you can, old, new. See what it's like to experience a liturgy there, because there are places where, as you well know too, Kathleen, beautiful, beautiful churches that have great architectural design and great devotional art, but weak liturgy, or places that are really, unfortunately, these Pizza Hut churches that have a wonderful liturgy, but they're just not combined. When you get the two together, that really sort of tells you about form and function. As we've seen at St. John Cantius, beautiful architectural work and beautiful liturgy. And I think that sends home a real message. And for me, it makes me want to participate in not only the sacred rites, but sacred art, because I'm seeing how it's getting used and used well. So I think when somebody experiences how well it can be used, it draws them into it to say, I want to do that. I want some of that. On the other hand, it could just be the attraction of beauty itself. And as we know from Thomas Merton, that was his drawback into the church, was just sitting in these beautiful spaces, saying something's going on here. And so, yes, beauty itself can be the great lure for a lot of young artists. And also just imagining things and saying, what is it I'd like to do? What saint? I sometimes would say to young artists, why don't you do a drawing of your patron saint? Just start there. Do a little research. What were their attributes? All those kinds of things. You know.
Yeah, it's really interesting approach.
Or imagine, I'd sometimes say, can you represent a saint through a still life? What do you mean? Well, if you were to do a still life of St. John the Baptist, what would it be? If you were to do a still life of St. Peter, what would it be? If you were to do a still life of St. Teresa of Calcutta, what would that be? What would the attributes be? Which isn't real difficult. It's a little more sophisticated, but some of our more modern interpretation of our saints lack those very things as attributes. Where for centuries we could identify a saint. We didn't have photography. We used attributes, and they're very identifiable, like Saint Philomena with the anchor and the arrows and all those things. We know automatically it's Saint Philomena.
Right.
Saint Thomas of Villanova. I prefer to represent him in his Augustinian habit, which was tattered rather than his episcopal robes. But even then, in his episcopal robes, holding a crozier and a loaf of bread. So all those sort of things combine and make an identity, so that can be passed on to others as well. Like what you're saying about Duncan, you have the great grandchildren version of someone like Saint Thomas of Villanova. Anyway, I think we're getting there. We just have to get a little further. But I think re-education is one thing, and also just letting people know that it's still alive and well, that nothing's really been lost. It might have gotten hidden, disguised, distorted, whatever. Like I was doing some research this morning on the change in body proportions through the modernist period, and what happened, comparing something like Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, and even some ones after that, to Le Corbusier. He used the same numbers, but came out with the most distorted modernist figures. And then that got applied to architecture. So it lost all of its humanist identity. And it was very intentional. And then that combined with Bauhaus to make pretty much what we still have with us today. And yes, it affects church art and architecture. Yeah.
Well, I think we've come to the end of our time here. But is there anything that you would like to promote? Or I know you've been doing that really interesting series we've been trying to reshare. Are there any more in your lecture series?
Yes, there are going to be 3 more in the spring. The 3 that we were going to do this past spring that we all had to cancel because of the whole COVID thing. But the 3 are, and I just had Father Tim and Father Giles here today for lunch. The 3 were, and probably still will be, the story of light and shade, going from creation onward, and how we use it in Catholic art. Light from, meaning God the Father. Light on, which is the Christ, the corporality factor. And light through, which is the Holy Spirit. And we use all those 3 forms in Catholic art and architecture. How do we use them? When do we use them? All those things. And I think that has to be sort of brought up to the surface again for contemporary artists and those who will commission us. The other is Bone of My Bone, and that is going from the use of the body in Catholic art, going from the creation of Adam and Eve onward, and how it has changed and what does it mean when we use it. And then the last one, we were going to have this one scheduled for the beginning of Holy Week, and hopefully we'll do that again. But it was the use of the demonic in sacred art or in church art. And what happened? When did we decide that we can no longer do this? Because we're dealing with a crisis right now that we can't really fight evil if we don't believe it exists. So when we look at our churches throughout history, the portrayal of the demonic and how it is overcome, it was critical. It was absolutely critical. And then all of a sudden, we sort of just, again, with modernism, we just decided, oh, well, it's only real if you believe in it. No, I think we know right now that it's quite real. And we can, of course, we're told the gates of hell will not prevail against it. So this lecture is about the use of it and where we are now in using it or not using it. So that's going to be this coming spring.
I can't wait. They sound really interesting, every single one. And the ones that you've done have been so informative and rich with slides. So I'm going to put the links in the description below so that, other people can see these lectures, because it's information you're not going to get anywhere else. It's a bit of art history from a Catholic perspective that is fascinating to me. And, I wish that.
Well, thanks, Kathleen. Thanks for your kind words.
You're welcome. Well, you'll have to come back on again, and hopefully we can work on maybe some workshops or something coming in the future, because when we hosted you before, it was sold out. It was very popular. People have written in asking for you to come back. So if we can,
that'd be wonderful.
Maybe we can do something online, but if not,
I'm after the success of these past three, because if I did them at the parish school there, I could only fit maybe 20, 25 people max. When we did the St. Francis lecture, we got 77. I could have never had that many people come to the lecture. So this has been, a mixed blessing, this lockdown, as it were. It's pushed me into another area that I knew nothing about, and but I'm learning it. I'm learning it a little by little.
Right. Well, I think we're all there. I never imagined I was going to have to become a talk show host, but here we are. So
thank you. Thanks so much.
All right. Well, thanks for your time today, and
we'll talk again.
Okay.
All right. Bye bye. Bye bye.
Bye bye.